In the late spring of 1931, the city of New York was a symphony of glorious, chaotic noise. It was the sound of a future being hammered into existence, a vertical roar that echoed from the Battery to the Bronx. And at its epicenter, at the corner of Fifth Avenue and West 34th Street, the Empire State Building was climbing its way into the heavens at a speed that defied logic, a floor a day, a testament to rivets, steel, and the relentless momentum of the American will. The papers called it a miracle of modern engineering. They published photographs of grinning workers perched on girders 1,000 feet in the air, lunch pails in hand, seemingly without a care in the world. It was a story of triumph over the Great Depression, a steel and limestone middle finger to economic despair. That is the story everyone knows. But deep below the spectacle, far from the flashbulbs and the cheering crowds, in the subterranean gloom where the city's true foundations were being laid, another story was unfolding. It was a story written not in headlines, but in sweat, mud, and a silence that would be ruthlessly enforced for nearly a century. The men working down there were not the daredevils on the high steel. They were the sandhogs, the muckers, the forgotten excavators. Many were immigrants, men who spoke in broken English and carried the weight of old countries on their stooped shoulders. They were digging the footings, blasting and clearing the stubborn Manhattan schist to anchor the world's tallest building to the bedrock of the island. One of these men was Casimir Volkov. He was not a man given to flights of fancy. His world was one of physical certainties, the heft of a shovel, the bite of a pickaxe, the shudder of a dynamite blast, the meager pay envelope at the end of a grueling week. He had come from a village in the Carpathian Mountains, a place where the oldest stories were not written in books but were carved into the very landscape, in the strange shapes of mountains and the unsettling depths of forests. He understood stone. He knew its grain, its temperament, its honest resistance. On a Tuesday in May, Casimir's crew was working at the bottom of the main foundation pit, a rectangular wound in the earth over 50 feet deep. The official geological surveys had been clear. The bedrock here was Manhattan schist, a resilient, predictable metamorphic rock, perfect for supporting the immense weight that was to come. For weeks, that's all they had encountered. The drill screamed, the dynamite boomed, and the rock yielded, ton by stubborn ton. But on this day, something changed. The change began not with a bang, but with a shift in sound. The rhythmic, high-pitched shriek of the primary core drill, a sound the men had grown so accustomed to it was like the beating of their own hearts, suddenly dropped in register. It became a low, resonant hum, a vibration that traveled not just through the ears, but up through the soles of their worn leather boots and into the bones of their legs. The foreman, a hard-nosed Irishman named Finney, cursed and ordered the drill shut down. In the sudden, ringing silence, the men looked at each other, their faces pale under the grime and the weak glare of the work lamps. The hum persisted. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there. It seemed to be coming from the rock itself. Finney inspected the drill bit. It was not broken or dulled. If anything, it looked polished, its tungsten carbide tip gleaming as if it had been buffed. He spat on the ground and ordered them to try again, slower this time. The drill was lowered, its engine growled, and the moment it made contact, the hum returned, louder now, a deep thrumming that made the loose gravel on the pit floor dance. The drill bit, instead of grinding and chipping, seemed to slide against the surface. It wasn't cutting. It was skating. This was not schist. Casimir, being the most experienced with the rock face, was sent down to take a closer look. He rappelled down into the borehole, his small lamp cutting a weak circle in the darkness. The air grew colder, and it carried a strange scent, like the charged atmosphere after a lightning strike, a clean, metallic tang of ozone. He reached the bottom and placed his palm against the surface that had stopped the drill. It was cold, colder than any rock should be, a deep, cellular cold that seemed to pull the warmth from his hand. And it was smooth, impossibly smooth. Not the jagged, crystalline texture of blasted schist, but the seamless, polished finish of worked metal or glazed pottery. He ran his fingers over it. There were no cracks, no seams, no joints. It felt like a single, continuous surface. He tapped it with the steel head of his hammer. The sound was wrong. Instead of a dull, stony thud, it produced a soft, resonant chime, like a distant bell. The note hung in the air, mingling with the low hum that seemed to emanate from within the material itself. He called up to Finney, his voice tight with a confusion that bordered on fear. He told him it wasn't rock. He didn't know what it was, but it wasn't rock. They brought in a heavier drill, a diamond-tipped monster designed to chew through anything. For an hour it hammered and ground against the impossible surface, its engine screaming in protest. The noise was deafening, but beneath it, the resonant hum grew steadily in intensity. Finally, with a sound like a pistol shot, the diamond drill bit shattered, spraying the pit with incandescently hot fragments. One of the workers cried out, clutching a bleeding arm. A panicked quiet fell over the site. Finney, his face ashen, knew he was out of his depth. This was no longer a construction problem. This was something else. He scrambled out of the pit and made a call from the site office. He didn't call the geological consultant. He didn't call the engineering lead. He called the private number for one of the project directors from Bethlehem Steel, a man who had visited the site only once, flanked by two men in dark, identical suits. The response was unnervingly fast. Within an hour, the entire site was cleared. The day shift was sent home, told there was a gas leak, a structural risk, anything to get them away. They were paid for the full day and told not to return until called. But as they left, they saw the vehicles arriving. Not construction trucks or city vehicles. They were black, unmarked sedans, the kind of cars that seemed to absorb the light around them. Men in sharp suits and fedoras, men with hard, empty faces, stepped out and descended into the pit, their movements precise and coordinated. They were not builders. They looked like federal agents, or something more severe. Casimir had lingered, hiding behind a stack of steel beams, a gnawing curiosity overriding his fear. He watched as the men in suits surrounded the borehole. They didn't bring drills or explosives. They brought strange, brass and copper devices on tripods, things that looked like a surveyor's theodolite as designed by a madman. They lowered a listening device into the hole, a polished cone attached to a thick cable. Then, one of them produced a smaller object, a metal rod that he struck against the surface. Again, the bell-like tone echoed up, and this time, in the absolute silence of the cleared site, Casimir heard something else. A response. From deep within the material, a faint, harmonic chime answered the first. It was a sequence of notes, complex and melodic, utterly alien. The men in suits showed no surprise. They packed up their equipment with an air of grim confirmation. A new crew was brought in, not sandhogs, but a quiet, efficient team of specialists who moved under the direction of the suited men. They didn't try to break the surface. They began mixing enormous vats of quick-setting concrete. By dawn, the borehole was filled. The entire bottom of the 55-foot foundation pit was being covered in a layer of reinforced concrete 10 feet thick. The impossible surface, the source of the hum, the origin of the musical tones, was being entombed. The official work log for that day would be altered. The entry would read, "Encountered unexpectedly hard metamorphic intrusion. Blasted and cleared. Proceeded with foundation pour." It was a lie. Nothing was blasted. Nothing was cleared. Something was found. And then it was buried again, deeper and more permanently than it had been before. The tallest building in the world would rise upon a secret, its great steel roots resting not on the honest bedrock of the island, but on the lid of a concrete tomb. But this is where the official story, the one written in concrete and steel and celebrated in history books, diverges from the truth. The official records speak of geological surveys, of load-bearing calculations, of the predictable and conquered earth. They are marvels of detail, cataloging every girder, every rivet, every bag of cement. Here is what those same, meticulously detailed records do not mention. They don't mention the shattered diamond drill bit. They don't mention the resonant hum. They don't mention the arrival of men in unmarked sedans, or the private, panicked phone call made by a foreman named Finney, who would quit his job 2 days later for personal reasons and move his family to California, never to work in construction again. They don't mention Casimir Volkov, who stood in the shadows and saw it all. This single, isolated incident, buried under the concrete of a single construction site, could perhaps be dismissed. A strange geological formation, a mass hallucination brought on by exhaustion and toxic fumes. The overactive imagination of an immigrant worker. This is what they would want you to believe. But it was not an isolated incident. It was a single, explosive confirmation of a pattern that had been emerging and been just as quickly suppressed for decades. Every time modern man tried to dig too deep into the flesh of Manhattan, the island was guarding a secret. Or more accurately, the island was the secret. To understand what happened under the Empire State Building, you have to understand that the accepted history of this sliver of land is a fabrication. A comforting bedtime story told to us to make us feel like we are the masters of this domain. We are told it was a wilderness, traded for trinkets, tamed by industrious settlers, and built into the capital of the world. This is a profound and deliberate understatement. The truth is far more complex and far more unsettling. The truth is that we are not the first builders here. We are merely the most recent. Welcome to the story they tried to erase. Welcome to the Real Foundation of New York City. Kazimir Volkov was a man of few words, but he was not a man without thought. What he had seen and heard in that pit disturbed him on a level he couldn't articulate. It resonated with the old stories from his homeland, tales of buried cities and sleeping mountain gods. He knew he had witnessed something forbidden. He knew the threats of the men in suits, delivered to the crew by a terrified company representative, were not idle. "You saw a rock," the man had said, his eyes darting nervously. "A hard patch of rock. That's all. Anyone who says different will have problems. Problems with their job, problems with their family, problems with their immigration status." You understand. They had all nodded. But Kazimir did something else. That night, in his small, cold tenement room in the Lower East Side, he took out a cheap, lined notebook and a pencil. In his native Polish, in a cramped, careful script, he began to write. He was not a diarist, but he felt a desperate, primal urge to record what had happened, to create a record that the men in suits could not confiscate, a truth that could not be sealed in concrete. This journal, passed down through his family and gathering dust for 70 years before being unearthed by his great-grandson, is our first and most crucial piece of evidence. It is the primary source, the witness testimony that unlocks the entire conspiracy. He wrote, May 12th. Today the earth spoke, not with the voice of dynamite, but in a song. We were drilling for the footings of the great tower. The machine, it stopped. The foreman, Finney, he cursed God and the company. But the steel was not broken. The rock below, it was not rock. I went down. The air was cold, like a winter cellar, and it smelled of storms. The surface was black and smooth like polished river stone, but it was not stone. I touched it. It was like touching the arm of a dead man, a cold that goes inside you. But it was not dead. It was humming. A low song, like a monk's chant, that you feel in your teeth. This description is vital. The humming and the cold are recurring themes in the suppressed accounts. This was not a passive material. It was active. It was radiating energy, energy that manifested as audible sound and thermal absorption. His next entry, from the day after the discovery, is even more chilling. He describes what he saw after the crew was dismissed. May 13th. They sent us away. Men in black coats came. Not workers. I hid and watched. They had strange tools, like brass spiders. They listened to the black stone, and it sang back to them. A melody. I heard it. It was not music a man could play. It was the sound of numbers. The sound of stars turning. The men in coats were not afraid. They were expecting it. Then they brought the cement. They are burying it. They are putting the giant to sleep again. Why? Why are they so afraid of its song? The sound of numbers. The sound of stars turning. How does a barely educated miner from a rural village invent a description so poetically, so precisely esoteric? He is describing an experience that is completely outside his frame of reference, yet he grasps its essential nature. This was not a geological or a biological phenomenon. It was a technological and mathematical one. He recognized structured information, a melody, a song, where others would just hear noise. This speaks to the profound nature of what he encountered. His journal continues for weeks, documenting not events, but his own psychological state. He describes recurring nightmares. Every night I am back in the hole, he writes. But it is not a hole. It is a room. The black walls glow with a soft, blue light. There are lines on the walls, like maps of veins. They pulse with the humming. In the dream, I am not afraid. I feel I am home. I wake up, and my room is so cold. He was forming a psychic connection to the buried object. The energy it was emitting was imprinting itself on his consciousness. Casimir's account is the Rosetta Stone for this entire mystery. But standing alone, it is still just a story. It requires corroboration. And that corroboration exists, buried in other forgotten files and whispered accounts from a generation of builders who constructed the bones of modern New York. We must look for the pattern. Let us rewind 27 years to 1904. The construction of the first interborough rapid transit subway line. A crew of Italian and Irish immigrants are tunneling north, a few blocks from Astor Place. Their method is cut and cover, digging a massive trench, building the tunnel structure, and then burying it again. Late one night, according to a letter written by one of the engineers, a man named Thomas Pell, to his brother, the excavation crew broke through a wall of gneiss into what they assumed was a natural cavern. But the cavern was perfectly spherical, about 30 feet in diameter, and its walls were coated in the same smooth, black, glassy material Casimir would describe decades later. Pell, a trained engineer, was called to the scene. In his letter, which his family preserved, he wrote, "It was astounding. The surface was utterly seamless and cool to the touch. It resisted a carbide drill bit as if it were diamond. The crew was spooked, claiming it was unholy ground. The air within the sphere was cool and carried a faint scent of ozone. What was most peculiar was that the sphere was not empty. In the center, suspended by what looked like thick, black glass cables connected to the walls, was a metallic object, a polyhedron of some 20 faces. It did not reflect the light of our lanterns. It seemed to swallow it. We had no sooner begun to properly examine it when two gentlemen from the main office arrived with a city official. We were ordered out. The next day, the entire sphere had been filled with concrete, and the tunnel route was subtly altered to go around it. The official report states we encountered a difficult pocket of glacial till and granite, a complete fabrication. A seamless, cold, black surface. The smell of ozone. A rapid, official cover-up involving concrete. The story is identical to Casimir's. Merely the details of the location and the specific contents have changed. Here, it was not a flat plane but a complete sphere containing a complex geometric object. A machine? A data storage device? A power source? Pell, like Casimir, knew he had seen something that defied all known science and history. His letter ends with a haunting question. Who builds a perfect sphere of indestructible material 30 feet beneath the ground? And for what purpose? I feel as though we are not building a new city, but merely renovating an ancient 1 inch. The pattern repeats. In 1925, during the demolition of the old Waldorf Astoria Hotel to make way for the project that would eventually become the Empire State Building, crews were deepening the foundation. A report, filed by a junior architect and subsequently buried in a sub-basement archive of the architectural firm Shreve, Lamb and Harmon, mentions a curious delay. The report is dry and technical, but it describes the discovery of a non-eutectic, metallic plate at a depth of 40 feet. The plate, when struck, exhibited anomalous resonant frequencies. The architect notes that a consultant from Bell Labs was brought in, took readings, and left with his data under a non-disclosure agreement. The plate was then encased in lead and concrete for vibrational dampening purposes on the orders of the project's financiers. A metallic plate, anomalous resonant frequencies, vibrational dampening. It's the same event, described in the sterile language of a different profession. The sandhog hears a song. The engineer sees an unholy sphere. The architect records resonant frequencies. Each witness describes the same phenomenon through their own unique lens, but the underlying truth is consistent. Something ancient and technological exists within the bedrock of Manhattan. The evidence isn't limited to private letters and buried reports. For a brief moment, the truth almost broke through to the surface. On May 14, 1931, 2 days after Casimir's discovery, a tiny article, no more than 2 column inches, appeared on page 17 of the Brooklyn Daily Eagle. It was a small, local paper, less prestigious and therefore less scrutinized than the Times or the Herald Tribune. The headline was innocuous. Geological Anomaly Halts 34th Street Project. The text was brief. Work on the foundation of the Empire State Building was briefly halted yesterday, following the discovery of an unidentifiable subterranean formation that resisted standard drilling techniques. Project managers have brought in specialists to assess the formation, which is said to be of a composition not native to the Manhattan schist. Work is expected to resume shortly. That's it. A tiny crack in the wall of silence. But the crack was sealed almost immediately. The next day, the Eagle printed an even smaller retraction. The anomaly reported at the Empire State Site yesterday has been identified by project geologists as a simple vein of unusually dense hornblende. The minor delay was procedural. Work has resumed on schedule, a simple vein of hornblende. A plausible, boring, and utterly false explanation. Hornblende is hard, but it doesn't shatter diamond-tipped drills. It doesn't hum. It doesn't sing back. Someone had made a phone call. A friendly editor was reminded of his paper's reliance on advertising revenue from the city's major corporations. The story died. But for one day, the truth was printed. The evidence was there, in black and white, for anyone who knew to look. This brings us to the final piece of corroborating evidence from that time. The tragic story of the silenced expert. The specialists mentioned in that brief newspaper article were not just a fabrication. One was very real. His name was Professor Alastair Finch. Finch was a geologist at Columbia University, a brilliant but eccentric academic with a reputation for challenging established dogma. He was one of the foremost experts on the geology of the eastern seaboard. According to the unpublished memoirs of his graduate assistant, Finch received a call on the evening of May 12th and was rushed downtown to the Empire State Site under a cloak of secrecy. He was lowered into the pit. He spent 2 hours examining the exposed surface. What he found excited him beyond measure. The assistant wrote, Alastair returned to the university just before dawn, his eyes wild with a kind of scientific ecstasy. He said, "They found it. It's not a theory. It's real." He claimed the material was a form of non-crystalline metal, an amorphous alloy with a quasi-crystalline atomic structure, something that shouldn't exist in nature. He performed a portable spectrographic analysis on site and said the readings were impossible, showing trace elements that did not correspond to anything on the periodic table. He said it was clearly manufactured, and the energy it was emitting was a form of patterned resonance, possibly a data transmission. Finch believed he had made the single greatest discovery in human history. He was convinced he was looking at a relic of a pre-human, technologically advanced civilization. He stayed up for 48 hours, writing a preliminary report, filled with his readings, his analysis, and his earth-shattering conclusions. On May 14th, he went to present his report to the project directors. He was met not by the directors, but by the same type of men Casimir had seen, the men in dark suits. They listened to his presentation politely. They looked at his data. Then they told him his report was now their property. He was to surrender all his notes and the spectrographic plates. He was to speak of this to no one. When Finch, outraged, refused, they laid out the consequences. His tenure at Columbia would be revoked. His access to funding would be cut off. His papers would be rejected from every peer-reviewed journal. They would destroy his reputation, painting him as a fraud and a madman. Finch was a man of principle. He refused to be silenced. He tried to go to the press, but the calls he made to journalists went unreturned. A week later, a scathing article appeared in a prominent scientific journal, co-authored by 2 of his biggest academic rivals, accusing him of falsifying data in his earlier, unrelated research on sediment layers. It was a professional assassination, swift and brutal. Within 6 months, Alastair Finch was disgraced. His tenure was revoked. He lost his lab. He died in 1938, a broken man, his name a cautionary tale among academics about the dangers of sensationalist thinking. His groundbreaking report on the object beneath the Empire State Building was never seen again. It was buried, just like its subject. The witness, the engineer, the architect, the journalist, the professor. 5 different sources, all telling the same story. A story of an impossible discovery, followed by a swift, systematic, and ruthless suppression. The question is no longer if they found something. The evidence for that is overwhelming. The real question is, what did they find? What was this humming, impossibly hard, resonant material? And why was its existence a secret so terrifying that it had to be contained at any cost? So what was it that they found? What secret lies entombed in concrete 55 feet beneath the lobby of the most famous skyscraper in the world? To answer that, we have to be willing to ask a much larger, much more terrifying question. What if what we call geology is actually archaeology? What if the bedrock on which we build our cities is not a product of natural forces, but the ruins of a former world? This is where we must introduce the theory of the archaic grid. It is a concept ignored by mainstream academia, ridiculed by conventional geology, but one that has been gaining traction among a small, dedicated group of independent researchers and historians who are not afraid to look at the anomalies and ask the forbidden questions. These are the modern seekers, the intellectual descendants of men like Alastair Finch, who are piecing together the puzzle that the establishment has tried so hard to dismantle. The theory of the archaic grid posits that our planet was once home to a global, Type 2, or even Type 3 civilization on the Kardashev scale. A civilization so advanced that their engineering operated on a planetary scale. They didn't just build cities, they terraformed and engineered the planet's crust itself. What we mistake for mountain ranges, plate tectonics, and geological formations are, in some cases, the eroded and petrified remnants of their unimaginable constructions, power conduits, atmospheric processors, and planetary resonance chambers. They built a global energy and information network, a grid, fused directly into the lithosphere of the planet. The primary building material of this civilization was a form of programmable matter, an amorphous alloy that could be manipulated by sound and electromagnetic frequencies. This is the impossible black material described by Kazimir Volkov and Thomas Pell. It was not simply a building block, it was a substrate. It could transmit energy, store information, and even repair itself. It was the ultimate smart material, and they used it to build the foundations of their world. Key locations on the planet, places with unique electromagnetic properties, were chosen as nodes for this grid. These nodes were complex power stations, data hubs, and resonance chambers. Manhattan is one of those primary nodes. The Manhattan schist is not natural. It is the weathered, degraded, and mineralized remnant of one of the largest nodes of the archaic grid. Its unusual hardness, its unique resonant properties, these are not accidents of geology. They are the lingering technological signatures of its original purpose. The grid is not just a metaphor. It is a literal description of the crisscrossing energy conduits that lie deep within the island's rock, conduits that still, after untold millennia, carry a residual energetic charge. This is the source of the hum. This is why Manhattan feels electric. It is, quite literally, a piece of ancient, dormant technology the size of an island. This ancient civilization, which we might call the Builders, did not vanish without a trace. They vanished in a cataclysm, a reset event. Whether it was a war, a failed experiment, or a natural cosmic disaster is unknown. The result was the near-total destruction of their surface world and the deep burial of their foundational technology. Eons passed. Ice ages came and went. New layers of sediment, soil, and life covered the ruins. A new, primitive species evolved, us, and we began to build our own, fragile world on top of the bones of the old one. Now, let us re-examine the discoveries through this new lens. The spherical chamber found by the subway crew in 1904 was not a tomb or a temple. It was a junction box, a capacitor. The polyhedral object suspended within it was its regulatory core. When the excavation crew breached its outer casing, they risked causing an uncontrolled energy discharge. The men from the main office, who sealed it, were not just covering up a historical anomaly. They were performing a necessary act of containment, preventing a potentially catastrophic technological event. The metallic plate, found under the Waldorf Astoria in 1925, with its anomalous resonant frequencies, was another component of the grid. A circuit board, a data plate. The fact that they encased it in lead and concrete for vibrational dampening is incredibly telling. They knew, or were advised by someone who knew, that the object was sensitive to vibration. They weren't just hiding it. They were trying to switch it off. This brings us back to the Empire State Building. The discovery made by Casimir's crew was the most significant of all. They had not just found a piece of a conduit or a minor component. The sheer size of the area that resisted the drills, the intensity of the hum, the complexity of the melodic response. It all suggests they had drilled directly into the primary control hub of the entire Manhattan node. This was the heart of the machine, the central processing unit. The construction of the Empire State Building was, therefore, not simply a commercial enterprise. It was a cover story for the most ambitious and audacious act of archaeological and technological containment in human history. Who was behind this? Who possessed this incredible, forbidden knowledge? The answer lies with the very men who financed and built the tower. John J. Raskob, the primary financial backer, was not just a capitalist. He was a high-ranking member of several influential secret societies and a close associate of the DuPont family, a dynasty whose wealth and power stretched back for generations. These were not just businessmen. They were, and are, what we can call the inheritors. The inheritors are a loose, transnational cabal of powerful families, academics, and government insiders who, at some point in the last few centuries, stumbled upon the truth of the archaic grid. They are the modern keepers of the secret. They are the ones who manage the discoveries. Their primary motive is not necessarily malevolent, at least not in their own eyes. They believe that humanity is not ready for the truth. The revelation that our entire history, religion, and science are fundamentally wrong would lead to societal collapse. The sudden introduction of the builder's energy technology would shatter the global economy, which is based on the control of scarce resources. So they suppress. They create front organizations. They fund mainstream academic departments to preach the accepted dogma. They control the media narrative, and when an accidental discovery is made, their agents, the men in dark suits, are dispatched to contain the situation. They discredit witnesses, they confiscate evidence, they assassinate careers. Professor Alastair Finch was not their first victim, and he would not be their last. They are the antagonists of our story. The institution is not the Smithsonian or a single government agency. It is this shadowy, amorphous group, the Foundation, as some insiders call it. Their work is facilitated by modern seekers who unwittingly do their bidding. One such figure is Dr. Eris Thorne, a contemporary architectural historian who operates on the fringes of academia. Thorne is the one who, through years of painstaking research, assembled the evidence we are discussing. He tracked down Casimir Volkov's great-grandson and had the journal translated. He found Thomas Pell's letter in a university archive. He uncovered the buried architect's report and the Brooklyn Daily Eagle clipping. He is the one who pieced together the fragments of Alastair Finch's story from the memoirs of his colleagues. Thorne believes he is fighting against the establishment, exposing a grand cover-up. And he is. But what he may not realize is that the narrative he is uncovering is, in itself, another layer of the onion. He has exposed the cover-up, but he has not yet grasped the full, terrifying reason why the cover-up is so absolute. He believes the motive is about controlling history and energy. He is correct, but that is only the beginning of the truth. The Empire State Building, seen through this lens, transforms from a symbol of ambition into a monument of containment. Its immense weight, over 365,000 tons, was calculated not just for structural stability, but to exert a specific quantum mechanical pressure on the humming plate below to keep it in a dormant state. Its famous spire, added late in the design process under the guise of being a mooring mast for dirigibles, a patently absurd and quickly abandoned idea, had a far more sinister and critical function. It is not a mast. It is a massive atmospheric electrostatic dissipator. A lightning rod, yes, but one designed not to protect the building from lightning, but to draw ambient atmospheric energy away from the ground, preventing the ancient device below from accumulating enough charge to reactivate. They didn't just bury a secret. They built a cage around it, a cage disguised as the eighth wonder of the modern world. They placed a pin in the heart of a sleeping giant. The pattern of discovery and suppression seen in Manhattan is not a uniquely American phenomenon. To grasp the true scale of the secret the inheritors are keeping, we must zoom out. We must look at the global map. The archaic grid was a planetary system, and its remnants are everywhere, waiting just beneath the surface of our own world. The story repeats, with local variations, in every corner of the globe where humanity has decided to build something monumental. Consider the construction of the Moscow Metro in the 1930s, a project happening concurrently with the Empire State Building. It was another great feat of national engineering, celebrated as a triumph of the common worker. Official Soviet records speak of the immense geological challenges of tunneling through unstable pockets of limestone and clay. But the diaries of Lazar Kaganovich, the project's supervisor, tell a different story. They speak of zonas glubokого molchania, or zones of deep silence. These were sections of the tunnels, particularly deep beneath the Kremlin, where workers discovered vast, geometric chambers lined with a material that drank the light and hummed with a cold fire. The material was described as a vitrified, non-conductive ceramic, but its properties were identical to the black, glassy substance in New York. It resisted all drilling and was cool to the touch. In one of these chambers, they found what Kaganovich described as frozen lightning, sculptures of light, solid and unmoving, that cast no shadows. The NKVD, the Soviet secret police, immediately sealed these sections. The workers were sworn to secrecy under threat of the Gulag, and the official geological maps were redrawn. The metro lines were rerouted, sometimes with absurdly sharp turns, to navigate around these forbidden zones. The secret of the Moscow grid node was kept not by a cabal of capitalists, but by the totalitarian state. The ideology was different, but the methods and the motive, containment, were identical. Let's move to London. During the excavation for the Canary Wharf development in the 1980s, deep below the marshy soil of the Isle of Dogs, pile-driving crews hit a layer of something they could not penetrate. It was located far below the Roman and medieval strata, in a layer of clay dated to be over 100,000 years old. The material, according to a leaked internal engineering report, was a fused metallic lattice of unknown composition. It emitted a low-frequency electromagnetic field that interfered with the workers' radios. The project was halted for 3 weeks under the official explanation of a surveying error during that time. A special unit from the Ministry of Defense, operating under the Official Secrets Act, cordoned off the site. They didn't use concrete. Their methods were more advanced. They deployed a device that generated an opposing electromagnetic field, effectively neutralizing the emissions from the lattice. The plans were then subtly altered. The deepest foundations moved a few hundred meters to the east. The official report was classified, and the engineers signed lifelong gag orders. The London node, a critical hub in the archaic grid connecting to the European mainland, was resecured. The evidence is global. In the 1960s, during the Aswan High Dam project in Egypt, sonar scans of the bedrock beneath the original site for the Temple of Dinder revealed a massive, perfectly rectangular void, hundreds of meters long. The void emitted patterned radio waves. The project's director, an Egyptian archaeologist trained at Oxford, quietly consulted with his British counterparts. The decision was made, under the guise of preserving the temple from the rising waters, to painstakingly dismantle the entire temple and move it, stone by stone, to a new location. The new location was chosen because it was geologically inert. The real reason was to move the ancient temple, itself likely built as a marker or monitor for the grid, away from the active node before the immense weight and water pressure of the new dam could potentially activate it. The world celebrated an act of historical preservation, never knowing it was a cover for an act of technological suppression. A unified origin is undeniable. The material composition, when analysis is permitted and then promptly classified, is always the same: an amorphous, quasi-crystalline alloy with impossible elemental readings. The architectural style, when glimpsed, is always monolithic, seamless, and based on complex, non-Euclidean geometry. The energy signatures, when detected, always share a common base frequency, a sort of carrier wave for the entire planetary system. It all points to a single builder, a single technological fingerprint left across the entire planet. This wasn't the work of disparate ancient cultures. It was the work of one, globally integrated civilization. But this global pattern is what makes the events in Manhattan so unique, so singularly important. This is the crucial distinction. In Moscow, London, and Egypt, the response was to avoid, neutralize, or move the problem. The nodes were bypassed or shielded. The goal was to let the sleeping dogs lie. But in Manhattan, Under the Empire State Building, they did something radically different. They didn't avoid it. They didn't try to neutralize its energy field with opposing technology. They engaged with it directly. They left the central hub of the node in place. They entombed it in a specific manner, and then they built the single largest man-made object of its time directly on top of it. Why? Why this unique and incredibly risky strategy? The answer must be that the Manhattan node was different. It was either too powerful to be neutralized, too vital to be ignored, or it served a function that the inheritors did not want to fully deactivate. The construction of the Empire State Building was not just a cage, it was an interface. The immense weight, the specific materials of the foundation, the lightning rod spire. This wasn't just a containment system. It was a regulator, a control mechanism. They weren't just putting the giant to sleep, as Kazimir Volkov wrote in his journal. They were putting it into a controlled coma, keeping it alive but unconscious, allowing them to monitor its vital signs, and perhaps even to tap into its dormant power in a limited, controlled way. This suggests a terrifying possibility. The inheritors are not just hiding the past. They are trying to reverse engineer it. The Empire State Building is not a tomb. It is a laboratory, a century-long experiment to study, and perhaps one day harness, the power of the archaic grid. The hum beneath the city isn't just a remnant. It's a patient on life support, and the skyscraper is its hospital, its prison, and the doctor's office, all in one. This is the secret within the secret, the truth that even a dedicated seeker like Eris Thorne has yet to uncover. The suppression is not just about preventing panic or protecting the economy. It is about monopolizing the single greatest technological inheritance in the history of the planet. So we must ask the final, most important question. Why? What is the ultimate motive for this century of silence, this global conspiracy of concrete and classification? The reasons are layered, each more profound and disturbing than the last. To understand them is to understand the true nature of power and the secret architecture of our world. The first, most obvious motive for the suppression is the one we have already touched upon: the preservation of the current social and historical order. Think of the consequences of the truth being revealed tomorrow. Every history book would be obsolete. Every major religion, with their human-centric creation myths, would be thrown into existential crisis. The very story of who we are, where we come from, and what our place in the universe is, would be shattered in an instant. We are not the pinnacle of creation. We are simply the weeds that grew up in the cracks of a fallen empire of gods. The inheritors, in their paternalistic wisdom, believed that humanity could not handle this revelation. It would lead to chaos, nihilism, and the collapse of the institutions that provide meaning and order to billions of lives. They see themselves not as conspirators, but as shepherds, protecting the flock from a truth it is too fragile to bear. They are maintaining the matrix, not because they are evil, but because they believe the alternative is annihilation. The second layer of motive is more cynical and more tangible. It is about power and control. The archaic grid is, at its core, an energy system. It taps into zero-point energy, geothermal gradients, and cosmic radiation, providing a source of power that is limitless, clean, and free. The release of this technology would instantly render the entire global economy, based as it is on the extraction, sale, and consumption of fossil fuels and other scarce energy sources, utterly worthless. The oil industry, the coal industry, the nuclear industry, all would vanish overnight. The power of the petrostates would evaporate. The financial markets, built on the trading of these energy commodities, would implode. This would be a reset far more devastating than any stock market crash. It would be the end of the economic world as we know it. The inheritors, whose families and institutions sit at the very apex of this economic world, have a vested interest in preventing this. The suppression, therefore, is not just about protecting the fragile psyche of the masses. It is about protecting their own immense wealth and the structure of global power from which they benefit. They are keeping humanity chained to a system of scarcity because they are the masters of that system. But there is a third layer, a deeper, darker motive, one that is whispered about only in the most secret circles of the inheritors themselves, one that explains the frantic urgency of the suppressions, the absolute ruthlessness of the enforcers. What if the builders are not gone? What if the cataclysm that destroyed their world did not kill them all? What if the humming chambers deep beneath our cities are not just dormant machines? What if some of them are tombs, not for the dead, but for the sleeping? Stasis chambers, arcs, lifeboats, waiting out the storm of millennia until the planet was habitable again. The melodic, mathematical signals detected by the men in suits, the psychic resonance experienced by Kazimir Volkov. What if that is not a machine's residual energy, but a consciousness? A slow, dreaming mind, waiting to be awakened. This is the ultimate terror, the final secret. The suppression is not about protecting humanity from its past. It is about protecting it from its predecessors. It is about ensuring that the builders do not wake up. Because if they do, what will they think of us? What will they think of the noisy, primitive, chaotic species that has infested their world, building our flimsy cities on top of their sacred technology, poisoning their atmosphere, and fighting our petty wars? Would they see us as curious successors? Or as vermin, a contamination to be cleansed? Now, the Empire State Building's unique design takes on its most terrifying meaning. The regulator, the control mechanism, it's not just for studying the technology. It's to keep the occupant of the chamber docile. The spire that bleeds off atmospheric energy isn't just to prevent a technological reactivation. It's to prevent the sleeper from gathering enough power to awaken. The entire building is a tranquilizer dart the size of a skyscraper. The inheritors are not just gatekeepers. They are prison wardens. And they are terrified of a jailbreak. This is the truth they are willing to kill for. This is the secret they have buried under a mountain of steel, concrete, and lies. Let us return, for one last time, to the man who started it all for us. Kazimir Volkov. He lived the rest of his life in quiet obscurity, working as a janitor, a baker, never again raising a shovel against the earth. He never spoke of what he saw, but he never stopped writing in his little notebook. His final entry, written in a shaky hand just a month before he died of a heart attack in 1965, is the most powerful testimony of all. It is not a description of an event. It is a confession, a summation of a life spent guarding a terrible and beautiful secret. I am an old man now, he wrote in Polish. My hands shake, but the humming has never stopped. It is quieter now, a whisper in the back of my head. For 40 years, I have lived in the city with the sleeping god beneath its feet. Sometimes, in dreams, I am in the black room again. The blue light is soft, and a voice, not of sound, but of feeling, shows me things. It shows me cities of light, built to the music of the spheres. It shows me oceans held in the sky and gardens that grow in the clouds. It shows me a world without pain, without toil, without death. And then it shows me the silence, the fire, the long, cold sleep. He continued, the men in suits, they think they are in control. They build their tower to hold it down. A pin in a butterfly's wing. They do not understand. They cannot stop the spring from coming. The song is not dead. It is waiting for the chorus. I have heard it. They built everything. We have built nothing. They built everything. We have built nothing. That is the final, devastating truth. Our civilization is a footnote. Our greatest achievements are but pale imitations of a world we cannot even begin to comprehend. We are children playing with matches in the ruins of a forgotten palace, blissfully unaware of the sleeping kings in the chambers below. The evidence is all around us, if we are willing to look. It is in the persistent hum beneath the streets of our oldest cities. It is in the impossible geology that defies our drills. It is in the silenced accounts of witnesses deemed mad and the buried reports of experts deemed frauds. The truth, like water, always finds a crack. It seeps through the concrete, through the decades, through the layers of official denial. The hum beneath New York City doesn't fade. It doesn't die. It waits. The tallest, most celebrated building of the 20th century was not an act of ambition. It was an act of fear. It was not built to reach the sky. It was built to pin something to the earth.